Corporate Finance Core, Topic 1, Section 4. Use Excel to compute financials and ratios. So we're going to do a little exercise in Excel. So I have a partial income statement, 2019, and a partial balance sheet, 2019, and we're going to compute the following items. So I'm going to jump to the Start Excel file. I'm going to go to Sheet 1. Notice I have Sheet Lecture and a sheet called Sheet 1. The lecture is all the numbers we used in the last 3 topics, and Sheet 1 is this exercise. The first thing I'm going to do, I want to use some Excel styles. So I will always use Excel styles to show what an input is and what an output is. So I'm going to select all of these numbers here, hold my Control button, select all these numbers, go Home, Style, Input. So you'll notice for the rest of my lectures, I'm always going to have these in the input style. And I'm also maybe make these into little boxes. I'll put some lines around them. So I'm going to highlight this, do a drop down on the borders, all borders, and do the same here. So it just gives it a little bit more readability and style. So now I want to compute EBITDA. So for EBITDA, I'm going to take my sales minus cost of goods sold minus SG&A. So I got 35. Oh, and also notice none of these are in particularly good format. So let me turn all of these values, hold my Shift Control button down, and I'm going to click on $, and I'm going to convert these into, click on %, add a couple decimal places. And then for EBIT, I'll do the same thing, make that $1. So I have EBITDA of $35, and we can always check ourselves by seeing the final number there. I'll add the formats later. Now for EBIT, I'll take my EBITDA minus my DA, which is depreciation. So EBITDA minus depreciation is going to be EBIT, my earnings before interest and tax. Now interest, I don't have interest here. I have an interest rate, and I have debt and loans. So let's just make it simple. Let's take the interest rate on debt times the debt and loan balance. So there's my $12 of interest expense. Then I can take my EBIT minus my interest, and I get earnings before tax of $13. All right, tax. I could just multiply my earnings before tax times the tax rate. Let me show you something that might help. Anywhere in a workbook, so this is called a workbook. Each one of these are called worksheets, and I could add more if I wanted by clicking on this. But in a workbook, you can name certain cells and give it a name range or a range name. So I can click on this 25%, come up here where it says B12, and type in tax and hit enter. Now notice if I click back on that cell, there's a drop-down menu here and it has tax. So I could take my EBIT times tax, and it's always going to refer to that cell. So my net income now is earnings before tax minus my tax rate of $975. Now these are always inputs. I'm going to select these. I'm going to make these calculations. And then on the last one, whatever the final number I'm usually calculating in an area, I'll call that maybe output. So it gives me an idea. I know these are inputs. I know these are calculations. What I'm trying to get to is net income. Now let's get cash flows from operations. I'm going to start with my net income. I'm going to add back my depreciation because that's a non-cash expense. I'm going to subtract the changes in inventory, subtract the change in accounts receivable, and add the change in accounts payable since that's a source of cash. I got minus 575. So even though the organization made 975 in net income, it had negative 525 in cash flows from operations. I'll make that a output. And then I'm going to do ROE. Take my net income divided by total E, equity, 6.5%, 6.25%, I'm sorry, 6.5%. Add a couple decimal places, make that a calculation. Let's do a couple ratios. Asset turnover, sales, divided by total assets. Net profit margin, net income over sales. And equity multiplier, assets divided by equity. I'll make this one a percent. And I'll just make these two comma. And I'll make those calculations. And just to verify my DuPont formula, asset turnover times net profit margin times equity multiplier is ROE. Make that a calculate output, and there we go. I've now computed some basic financial statement values to get my net income, calculated cash flows from operations, computed ROE as a ratio, and then got the components for the DuPont to verify the DuPont formula. So in this topic, we talked about formats, doing calculations in Excel, setting range names, and how to just basically do Excel to make some very simple calculations. So in this topic 1, we've compared corporations with other business forms. We understand the construction and analysis of a balance sheet, income statement, and statement of cash flow. We computed and interpreted accounting ratios of solvency, asset management, and profitability, and we used Excel to compute financials and ratios.